Hey there, I'm Matt.
And I'm Ollie. Welcome to Starting Strong, Thriving in the First Years of Preaching.
A podcast where we help preachers starting out in ministry to navigate the journey from seminary to Sunday morning.
We're not the experts, but we are bringing the experts to you. Each episode we interview experienced ministers who share the practical wisdom they wish someone had told them when they were starting out.
And so whether you're preaching weekly or monthly, we're here to help you develop healthy habits that will serve you for years to come. And today we think about kids' talks. Enjoy.
Well, hi, and welcome to today's episode of Starting Strong. My name's Ollie. Great to be with you.
And I'm Matt. This is Ian Jones. And so welcome, Ian. It's good to have you here with us.
Thank you. Good to be with you. Yeah, no, good to be with you. And we're particularly glad to have you here because your wife, Jenny, is one of our most avid listeners. So shout out to Jenny. How does Jenny feel about you coming on?
I'm very excited. It's good. And just to get a 30-second snapshot of you, Ian, and your ministry context and what that looks like, what do you get up to these days in ministry?
So I'm a husband. I'm a father of 4. Grandfather of 3. I'm a small business owner. And in terms of ministry context, I'm an elder in our local church. I am a small group leader, and I've recently just stepped down as the kids' church ministry leader after 12 years, just having a break for the moment, and very pleased that someone very capable has stepped in. But I'm still coordinating the kids' talks for our weekly Sunday services.
Definitely.
Good. And as part of that, either the kids' talks or your recent work as kids worker, what's been a particular joy or something that's given you a heart in ministry? Well, having recently stepped down, I got a special morning tea was put on for me, and a lot of people said thank you, and I got some lovely cards and some gifts as well. That was very encouraging to me. But I got a card from one of the girls in kids' church, and she laminated the card and she wrote quite a few things which were very nice. But she wrote this one. She said, "My favourite verse is Romans 8:31. If God is for us, who can be against us? Because it gives us courage to continue believing even when it's hard." And she said, "I'm also very grateful when you asked me and my sister to lead the kids' talk. I was very scared to speak up in front of everyone, but now I think it was an important lesson in being courageous." So I was really encouraged by the fact that she's learning God's word and how it's applying to her life. And like we're talking about kids' talks today, and I'll be honest, this person that I did ask, I was kind of a little bit hesitant. I know that she and her sister, they're quite shy, and I was a bit reluctant because they don't speak up as clearly as perhaps what some of the other kids when they participate. But I was just encouraged that she actually found it really encouraging to sort of perhaps extend herself and do the kids' talk. So I was really encouraged that even though she was a little bit quiet when she did it, that was good for her, it was good for her sister, it was good for her mum too, who participated as well. So I was really encouraged.
Yeah, that is really cool.
Yeah.
And praise God for that. And we often ask people what it was like for their first sermon, if they remember that, except because the topic today is kids' talk.
Yeah.
Can you remember maybe one of your first kids' talks you ever did and how that went for you?
I'm not sure if I can remember my first one, but I do remember one, and I'm pretty sure it was the year 2000, and I was a pretty keen runner back then, and I'd just run my first marathon, which was a bit of a disaster actually, but I based the kids' talk on Hebrews 12 about running the race with perseverance, throwing off everything that hinders, and I kind of dressed up with lots of layers of clothing and even a pillow shoved up my jumper. And through the kids' talk, I was kind of throwing off all the clothes, bit by bit. I was taking out the pillow and just taking off everything. And by the time I finished the kids' talk, I was just wearing really what was an inappropriate running outfit. And so I think it was memorable, and it kind of stuck to the text. But looking back now, it had lots of problems. The kids' talk, it wasn't connected to the sermon. We used to just have kind of random kids' talks. It was probably way too long. Like I said, by the time I got to the end, I was inappropriately dressed. I had these kind of skimpy running shorts, which people used to wear back then. It wasn't very well organized. I hadn't scripted it, and it probably just didn't point, very clearly to Jesus. And it was probably too much about me. And
probably a little bit moralistic about, just what we do to throw off sin. So while it was memorable, and I can still remember it, looking back, it had lots of problems.
Does sound memorable.
Yeah.
Now, you've begun to cover heaps, even in just that example of what didn't work. But perhaps if we go right back to the start or foundations to begin with, when you hear kids talk, what is it? What is it not?
Yep.
Do you want to give us a
Sure. So some of the things that I think it is, I think it's a teaching moment in the worship service. And it's when I say a teaching moment, it is something that kids can connect to, and it's kind of a recognition that the corporate worship, when we gather for worship, it's for everybody, from the youngest to the oldest, and so it's really a way of saying, kids, you're welcome here, and so we want to include you. It is directed. Often, it's usually directed at the kids, but I've recently kind of been told that it's actually directed at the kids, but it's for the parents often to give them a language, to give them tools to be able to communicate the gospel clearly to their kids. And so it's often just a weekly example. How can I explain the gospel to my kids? How can I explain this passage to my kid? So it is for the whole congregation, and so it's hopefully very accessible for the whole congregation as well. And I often hear people talk about the kids talk with feedback from those who have done it or feedback to me, that for people who perhaps are new Christians, people whose English isn't their first language, that actually sometimes I get a bit more out of the kids talk than I do out of the sermon, or maybe not quite that extent, but they really appreciate the kids talk because often it is just condensing the sermon down to 3 to 5 minutes that is very clear and really just gets to the big idea of what the sermon will be later on. What it's not, it isn't a substitute for the sermon. So it's not the sermon. It's often just the big idea of the sermon being clearly articulated somehow. It's usually just one point. Often a sermon will have a big idea, but it'll have a number of points. And so it's usually just one point. It's not the whole passage that perhaps the congregation are looking at. And what it's not, or what it shouldn't be, is a performance or entertainment. Although it's, like at any sermon, it's to be presented. Hopefully it's to be presented well and clearly and engagingly. It's not a performative thing. Yeah.
And you sort of, in that answer, you touched on why it matters, in that it's a model and in that it teaches the kids simply an idea, which is really good. Are there any other reasons why you think it matters, or what's at stake in kids talk?
Yeah. Well, I think as Christians, truth matters. And so we want to be truthful when we present a kids talk. So there's reasons why, we obviously, we don't want it to be something that is, leading kids astray. And so truth matters. In fact, corporate worship matters. When we get together as a congregation, it matters how we worship. It matters to God. And so if we're going to have a kids talk, then it matters that our worship is reverent and respectful and, I guess, worshipful rather than just being an entertainment. It's good to be learning together the same thing. And so it matters because also it's a great way of introducing the big idea for the day. Not all churches do kids talks that line up with the sermon. That's up to them. Sometimes it can be quite difficult to line it up, to actually be able to, we'll talk about it later, to write one, to put a kids talk together. It's not always that easy, and you need quite a lot of time to do it reasonably well. But it can be really helpful to do that. So to be learning together, and some churches obviously they don't have kids talks, and that's okay too. That's to be decided by the ministers or the leaders of the church. So, but if there is going to be a kids talk, it matters that it's done truthfully and faithfully to God's word. Yeah,
awesome. Thinking in line with that, and thinking how can you keep it at an age appropriate thing? I think sometimes though we underestimate how much kids can understand spiritually.
Yeah. I think definitely. We can't always tell from a kids talk, but when we're in kids ministry and we're teaching little ones, I haven't had a lot of experience in sort of preschool kids, but definitely from the time kids getting to prep, I'm really amazed how much they can take in. amazed how easily they can memorize scripture. I kind of always am sort of blown away that for us older folk, we seem to really struggle to memorize the Bible and remember facts and things like that. But kids can really, their brains are like little sponges that seem to be able to take in. So, yeah. I do remember a number of years ago, a young boy, he wasn't very old, and he hadn't had really much church experience. He just started coming along, and English wasn't his first language. He struggled with English, and we were looking at Psalm 139, how God knows everything about us. He knows what's happened in the past. He knows what we're thinking. He knows what's going to happen in the future. He knows even a word before we speak it. And he was just blown away by, wow, this God's amazing, that he knows all this. And so his comprehension very quickly, just from, it wasn't a kid's talk, it wasn't a lesson, we were just reading out the Bible together. And so his capacity for understanding, and I think we do underestimate and so I think it's really good for kids' talks, and we can perhaps talk about this later, about not dumbing them down, but we want them to be accessible, obviously. But kids, they can understand things, even of a fairly complicated theological depth, quite often. Yeah.
And that is wonderful that they have that capacity to memorize. Even like at our church, we do a Q&A, which they just can somehow memorize these answers so well, which is really wonderful. And it's good to see how capable kids are. And even biblically, how does the Bible explain and encourage this idea that God's word is taught clearly to kids? You mentioned that we want to preach truth, and they're included, but anything else you can think biblically that encourages this as well?
Yeah, well, I think the Bible is full of teaching about what's not true, about correcting error. And so it is important that we are teaching the truth, and sometimes it helps us to correct error when we just teach the truth. And I think today in a lot of churches, the rates of biblical illiteracy are very high, and I think that's a very dangerous thing in terms of our own salvation. If we misunderstand the gospel, if we're trusting in something or someone else apart from Jesus, that's a really dangerous thing. And so teaching the truth about the gospel is very, very important, but also has even implications for life, living life. If we misunderstand the Bible, then I don't know how we make sense of this world that we live in. I mean, what hope do we have of, coping with all that happens around us if we don't understand God's word well, that we aren't able to put our trust in the Lord Jesus, in the hope that we have in heaven, if we're just teaching some sort of false gospel. I mean, I think we see it, and as an example, if we've kind of got an emphasis on what has been known as the prosperity gospel, if we're teaching that kind of thing, what happens when our world crumbles around us? What happens when it crumbles around a kid? They must be lost. Their sense of hope, where their trust lies, is just shattered. So truth really matters, and so we want to get it right, even from a very young age. Yeah.
So you've mentioned that's helpful. You've mentioned the prosperity gospel and the importance of us teaching the gospel. That's obviously a false gospel.
Yeah.
But what might that look like to teach the gospel to young children? How would that differ to teaching it to adults? Or what would it look like to communicate? How do we communicate that truth of the gospel to kids?
To teach the same thing appropriately to kids, to adults. So as I mentioned before, our kids' talks pretty much always line up with what the rest of the church is teaching on that Sunday. And so we try to have with the kids talk, have the same big idea, but we'll perhaps present it in different ways. So in the kids' talk, it might be just one illustration to flesh out the big idea, to make that clear. It might be in a kids' talk. It just might be a narration, like acting out the passage. If there's some action happening in there, so we might act it out. But we might use more to teach the same thing to kids. We might use, particularly if you're in kids' church, you might use more illustrations. You might use games. When you have some sort of activity or a game, you might have some sort of craft to keep illustrating the same things. But you will often use a simpler language. And if you do use complicated words, big theological words, you'll always, or hopefully, explain them in a clear language so that the kids will be able to connect with that. And often the teaching will be shorter. The teaching time for kids will be shorter than for adults. But it's the same big idea, but often clearer in a more, child accessible language. Yep.
So you wouldn't use propitiation?
Not without it being explained.
Good answer. And so because it's such a short talk, and often a passage or a Q&A can have lots of ideas, how do you decide what you're going to put in that short talk when there's so much you could put in?
Yeah, well, the temptation, if you're writing one from scratch, is to look at the passage and think, wow, there's so much to say, and you try to include everything. And I think that's the really important thing about having one big idea, because that will direct where you're going. Also, something else that is helpful is if you know you've only got 3 to 5 minutes, you can't cover everything. There's only a certain amount of material that you can cover. So what to include? Often a kids talk will have an introduction or a context, but even that takes up time. And so, are you going to include that? You need to make that, because you might be able to make the point clearly with just by jumping into the action, whether it's a story, illustration, a mini movie. So, do you include a context to start with? Maybe not. But you always, I think I said that in my introduction when I was talking about that first kids talk from Hebrews, throwing off all that hinders, come back to the gospel, come back to Jesus. And so that's, I think, always include that. I'm always conscious of including application. So I'm always conscious of including some sort of application so that it is not just a theological lesson, as good as that might be. So I want to include maybe an introduction in context, some sort of teaching, always pointing it to Jesus, and usually having some sort of application for the kids. And the other thing that I want to include, and it's not in terms of the actual material itself, I want to include some sort of joy, something good about the kids' talk that the kids think, oh, that being a Christian, being a follower of Jesus, it's really good. And so, you want the same for kind of anyone who participates in worship, whether they're preaching the sermon, whether they're welcoming you, praying. I think it's really an important thing to include. This is a good thing to be part of God's family. We're worshiping together. That's a good thing. So I think that's really important. Yeah.
Yeah. It's quite remarkable when you're talking about kids' talks, how similar so much of that is to both the sermon, but everything we do at church.
Yeah.
You want one kind of big, clear idea. You want that to land. You're wanting application. You're wanting to move our hearts to joy and gladness. So it's remarkable how much overlap there is, isn't it? Now, perhaps changing tact or kind of digging into some of the other stuff you're talking about before then, what are some effective ways you've found to engage kids and to bring them in and get them hooked and paying attention while not just becoming entertainment?
I think when we're presenting a kids' talk, it's really good to be aware that there are lots of different ways of presenting a kids' talk. And so I encourage the people who participate and write kids' talks in the church that I belong to, don't just have one kind of model for a kids' talk. And so that kind of keeps it interesting and engaging. And so there might be a passage where it's some sort of theological teaching, and so you want to illustrate the point with perhaps a story or an example. Like I said before, it might be a narrative where perhaps the disciples are doing something or Jesus is doing, and you can just act out the narration and have some small comments at the end to potentially add some application and just to reinforce that big idea. Other things that I think are great for kids' talk are props, engaging props, movement, if possible. Sometimes I think, if you've ever been to church, you might have seen a science experiment they can be very engaging for kids to make a point. using a story from the Bible, perhaps a Bible story to illustrate another point, a theological point, it can be a good way to do that. Something else that the congregation and kids often like is to have some sort of participation themselves. So they might have to say something or make the sound of a storm or something like that if they're given instructions beforehand. But having said, audience participation can be really good, I think there's some warnings there about audience participation. I think perhaps young ministers, you might have seen examples of where the person doing the kids talk, they ask the kids a question, and the kids, they put up their hand or they yell out the answer, and it's wrong. And that can be a bit awkward. Or I remember growing up, and there was one kid who always sort of gave the answer during the kids talk in the service, and it was a very long answer, and it was very hard to butt in and cut them off. And so I think in terms of participation, I usually work on a model where the participation is very controlled, just for the sake of not being too long, but also it can be a bit embarrassing if the kids, give an answer and it's wrong, say, oh no, it's not quite, so you can avoid that. So participation is good, but be careful if you're asking the kids a question, either make it a very simple yes, no a question, or just have it so everyone participates in the same way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
We have one guy in our congregation, bloke, he's a dad, and he's a pyromaniac. And chance he gets fire, and it's beautiful. I love that. But how do you balance that idea of fun and faithfulness as well?
Yeah.
Sort of on the entertainment idea, but
yeah.
How do you get those two right?
Yeah, that is a balance that can be hard to manage. I think just being aware of what the gathering is. The gathering of God's people is centered around the Lord Jesus. It's centered around His Word, and I think the Bible tells us that our worship is meant to be something that's orderly. That is, I think it's meant to be, a sense of reverence and respect, of worshipfulness. I'm not sure if that's a word. I may have made it up. But so just be aware of those things. But having said that, I mean, just like a sermon, it is meant to be engaging. We're human beings who, can easily be, turned off because we're not good listeners and we can get bored. And so at Kids Talks, I think are meant to engage our senses. We recently had a kids talk, and it was about hypocrisy. It was, looking at other people and not seeing, the sin in our own lives. And I was very aware that this is a pretty serious kind of thing to be a hypocrite, to be that kind of person. But the kids talk kind of had this idea of someone had a magnifying glass and they were looking at these tiny things that were what they thought were wrong with other people. Maybe their hair was out of place, or they had a very, very small stain on their clothing, or just, very minor things, and had that magnifying glass. But it was hilariously funny, not because the actor was, trying to be a clown or anything, and not because the narrator was, hamming it up. It's just that it was so engaging, and the person took it so seriously, and they really threw themselves into the role of being the hypocrite, really. So while it was a very serious thing, it was very funny. But what happened? A lot of people came up to it was funny, but it was very memorable. It was kind of made the point so clearly about the hypocrisy of pointing out other people's sins. So sometimes it can be hard to avoid being engaging and even humorous, even on a serious topic like that. But it is a challenge to keep things like serious. But joy and humor, I think that's okay. We're human beings and we want to express joy. We want to use humor when it's appropriate. And so when I do a kids talk, I'm telling other people, giving them some instructions about kids talks. It's okay to be humorous when it's appropriate. It's good to be serious when the topic is serious. And so, finding the balance, not always easy, but being aware of these things, it's really important, I think, in a kids talk. Yeah.
It is. We actually go to the same church. I remember that kids talk you're talking about. One of my sons was sitting between my legs as we were listening. He was laughing outroariously at that. And I've had people comment about that kids talk.
months later had a point stuck with them about hypocrisy. And so, it can be a great teaching tool, very memorable and made the point well. Do you have any tips for us about how to adapt language to kids? So you talked before about not using words that are too big, or make sure we explain that. But do you have any tips? How do we adapt language while also not just dumbing things down needlessly at the same time?
Because we line up our kids' talks with our sermon series at the church that we go to, we often have to write kids' talks ourselves because while there are some really good kids' talks out and different various bits of material that you can subscribe to or get from the internet or wherever, because we're writing a lot, I'm writing a lot myself, or I'm asking other people in the congregation who are gifted at that to write kids talks themselves. I am, however, very surprised that people who are very capable, they really struggle to use language that is what I call kind of kid-friendly. They'll often pick a word, you just did an explanation of something when that I'm thinking, actually, most kids under, grade 3, they're going to struggle to understand that word. And so I'm often underlining and circling words that, can you find a word that's actually a little bit simpler for the kids? And so it's just being aware of language that is more accessible, particularly for the younger kids. And so that's just in terms of words, but also in terms of language. Like I mentioned before, if we're going to use some big theological words, that we explain them, but also, it's a bit of a gift to be able to explain complicated words simply and memorably. And so if we do introduce big words, that they're done simply. Often language too, some versions of the Bible are a bit easier for kids to understand than other Bibles. The Bible we use for the kids at our church is the NIRV, which is the New International Reader's Version. That's a really good Bible, I think, for being accessible. So even if you're going to quote the Bible in a service, you might want to think about which version you're going to use, like in a kids' talk, which version you're going to use that is perhaps a bit more easily understood. But like you said before, you were asking that question about the kids' ability, we underestimate them. So we don't want to, dumb it down so simply. It's finding the balance. The kids' talk is kind of in the church that I go to, it's kind of directed to the primary school, and perhaps it's the creche kids are there as well, listening intently. But it's kind of language for kids that age. So just thinking about, how we phrase things carefully. It can sound still simple, but it shouldn't sound dumbed down. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
And even then on a practical level.
Yeah.
So you said some words are difficult to simplify, like big words like propitiation, justification, redemption, even grace, sin. Those things we sort of have an idea of.
Yeah.
How do you go about, all right, here I'm going to talk about justification. How do you go about thinking, how am I going to explain this more clearly to a 7-year-old?
Yeah. Perhaps with a word like sin, it could even be acted out in a kid's talk. How would you potentially act out what sin looks like? We're talking about us and God. Even the action of turning away, turning your back, perhaps shaking your fist, or somehow folding your arms and ignoring God, or even somehow having some sort of false idol. Sin's a little bit complicated, but just having simple actions in a kid's talk can help something which is, sin is get a little bit complicated, but it is in some ways simple also. So actions can do that. We talk about grace. I remember when I grew up, I heard grace explained as God's riches at Christ's expense. And that could be explained, but also grace can be easily illustrated just from perhaps a family situation where your parents might extend grace, or they might extend forgiveness to you as a kid. And so just simple illustrations, word pictures can sometimes be very helpful for kids to understand that. And using them in kids' talks is a helpful way, I think, to use language or illustrations that help explain, big Christian ideas. And also using, and again, don't underestimate kids, use the language of the Bible. in verses from the Bible to help explain some of those, words we're just talking about. Even a big word like justification. I think, if we explain that from the Bible, that can be easily understood by kids by using those kinds of examples that I talked about.
Which then gives a great opportunity where you're laying that foundation of understanding for the kids, helping them understand sin or grace or forgiveness. And hopefully that's giving them an understanding to fill in that mental image. We've all got our mental image of what it means. That's teaching them.
And also model it to the parents as well, which is great, being able to do that.
Yeah, that is good.
Yeah.
Now, Ian, sometimes there's a danger with kids' talks that they can become moralistic.
Yep.
Obey your parents or don't lie or whatever it might be. Do you have any thoughts on how do we avoid it being moralistic?
Firstly, I want to say that actually teaching morals to kids is a good thing. Teaching morals from the Bible, it's good. But in a kid's talk, it can be a danger that it is just a moral lesson. And you could hear a moral lesson. The kids could go to just a school and hear a moral lesson. And that's okay, but that's not what we want to teach our kids, just moral lessons. You talked about obeying our parents. That's a good thing. And so often, I think one of the best ways to avoid that is kind of go to the why. Why obey your parents? Colossians, I think it's 3:23, obey your parents in everything because this pleases the Lord. And so we go to actually, we want to honor God with the way we live, but also we want to obey our parents. Actually, who was the one who truly obeyed his parents, his father, without any fault, without any sin? It was Jesus. And in fact, he went to the cross for us. Why would we love others? We're called to love others. That's a good moral lesson. But why should we love others? Because God's loved us so much. And so again, we can point to the cross. Why should we be patient with each other? God's been so patient with us. Even when we mess up all the time, he's so patient with us. Why give? Why give any of our time, our talents, our money? Why do we give? God gave everything for us. So we can just keep coming back to the gospel when we talk about any of these moral lessons. And so it's not just about being a good person. Yeah. And of course, the danger is we just talk about morals. Okay, we can earn God's favor. And so that's the real danger in just having moral lessons for kids in kids' talks.
Yeah, that was good. And so pointing back to the gospel and Jesus, that's the key, isn't it?
Yeah.
And again, it's how good that is, not just for the kids, but for the whole church to hear why we do this. That's great. And so take us, Ian. You or someone in the congregation has asked, do a kids talk for this Sunday.
Yep.
Can you take us pretty much through that whole preparation process?
Yep.
So that people can have an idea of how to go about getting this ready.
Yeah. Probably like preparing a sermon, you've got to find that big idea. And so often, if you've got to start from scratch for a kids talk, pray, read the Bible carefully. But if you're lining it up with perhaps a sermon, great idea to contact your preacher for the day. What's your big idea? And so some of that work's already done for you. You've got a big idea, and once you've got a big idea, then it's a good idea to keep reading and praying. And how am I going to appropriately teach something about this big idea? And so we talked about. I'm not sure if I talked about it yet, but thinking about those different types of kids talks. What's an appropriate kind of talk for this passage? Something that's is it going to be an illustration? Is it going to be that science experiment? Is it going to be what's going to really engage the kids to be able to appropriately teach that thing? Another thing I think is in terms of the process, if I'm running a kids talk, my kids talks are always better if I've collaborated with someone. If I've got feedback from one or two other people who are creative, can see, actually you're going off track. Hey, why are you teaching 2 points here? I thought you were just supposed to do one. That looks way too long. The intro is really boring or whatever like that. So collaboration is really good when you're preparing a kids talk. Also, the other thing is, once you've kind of got the kids talk, there's a lot of stuff actually you need to think about in terms of the preparation of the presentation. And so you need to think about, like we talked about before, are you going to use props? What type of props are you going to use? Are you going to be heard? So you need to be in communication with your at the guys on the sound desk. Are there going to be PowerPoints? Are they prepared? Are they clear? Where are you going to you're going to be up front somewhere? How are you going to use the space so that the music stand's not in the way, or the lectern's not in the way, or if there's a narrator, are they standing in front of anyone who's acting? And so just little things to think about in terms of the process and preparation. But yeah, I'd say that finding that big idea is really key, and then choosing the type, the genre of kids talk that you will be appropriate for that kind of teaching. Yeah.
Excellent. So you've done all of that work. You've done your preparation work.
Yeah.
Any thoughts or tips for us when you get up there?
Yep.
And now you're speaking, you're delivering. Any tips, or how do you do that well?
Yes. I do have some tips.
That's great.
Yeah. So in terms of that preparation and the presentation, one tip I would say is that if you ask someone to, participate, perhaps to act or narrate, and they're reluctant to participate, I'm not sure if I want it. Don't ask them. Say it's okay. I have found that the reluctant participant is not the best participant. They usually won't throw themselves into the role. The person who's willing to put aside their inhibitions is a much better person to engage kids in the kids talk. I think I talked about before, that guy with the microscope, looking at the people's little spots and stains on their clothes. He just forgot about himself and just threw himself into the role because he's just so good at that, and he just forgets about all these inhibitions. So don't ask people who are reluctant to do it. Just a practical tip, I think if you're, generally we have narration-based kids talks at our congregation where it's narrated and people will act things out, or it's narrated with perhaps a mini movie. So there's usually only one person who is mic'd up. So that person needs to be able to present it clearly in a voice that can be understood and heard by everybody. I did ask someone once, actually no, I didn't ask them. I asked someone to coordinate the kids talk that week, and they organised the narrator. And that narrator, I hadn't done it before, had a very strong accent, very hard for most of the people in the congregation to understand the narration. So just be aware of people's speaking skills and clarity. So things like that. Up front, no, I would suggest don't use your phone to present the talk. I think phones up front, in fact, I think in pretty much any speaking environment, I think phones, for some reason, they just look wrong. They look as though, I know you're doing a wedding speech, but it does look like you're scrolling. It does like potentially you're looking at your messages at the same time or something like that. So I think either have it printed out or on it. For some reason, I think an iPad, it seems a bit hypocritical to say an iPad's okay, but a phone is not okay. I think phones, to me, they look wrong. It's just for me, I'm sure a lot of people, younger generation, couldn't care less. But I think have it written out or on an iPad. Also, actually, I think one of the dangers, I do see people doing speeches and things or talking from a phone. It's a small device and you can only see a few words I think you can't see that many words. You can't see very far ahead. And so I think it's a more dangerous tool to read from. Perhaps okay if you just got dot points, but if you're reading out word for word, I think a phone can be more difficult and a bit more fraught with danger. Dress appropriately if you're up front.
Not in a running outfit.
Yes, that was very inappropriate. But also, I have got a document that I send out to the folk who are doing kids talks, and I ask them if you've got any actors, and this applies to yourself if you're narrating. Be mindful. This is for males and females. Be mindful of your neckline, your waistline, and there was some other line I can't remember, but just being aware you're up front, we're in public worship, and just the idea that what you're wearing, it can be a distraction, and the way you're wearing something, it's not about you and your clothing to show off what a lovely figure you have or how big muscles you've got or what brand you're now supporting, if it's blazoned away, or what cause you're presenting. So be aware of your clothing. Gender roles. I think if you've got actors and there are specific male and female roles, stick to males playing male roles, stick to females playing female roles. I think that's a much safer way to go. A lot of people are very sensitive about that. Acting is playing the role of someone else. I get that, but people are sensitive to gender roles, acting out. Be aware of the people playing the part of Jesus. Some people are okay with people taking on the role of Jesus, acting him out. Other people are more sensitive. You might want to even speak to this podcast is for young ministers. You need to probably make a decision. Do I want to act out the role of Jesus? Do I want him acted out? I generally don't have the role of Jesus acted out in kids' talks because I know there's some sensitivity around that. And so be thoughtful about how you're going to do that. And if you are going to play the role of Jesus, be very careful how you do that. I'd be very careful about doing it in a flippant way or anything like that. Some kids' talks that we subscribe to and use, they have the voice of God. So, God says in the Bible, I think that's okay. If God says it's from his word, we can definitely quote that. I'm a bit weird about people putting on like a God voice when they don't deepen your voice to sound like some holy. just speak in your normal voice if you're quoting from God. And I think we've talked about it before. If you're presenting a kid's talk, you've got people in there. Be prepared to get out of your comfort zone. If you're acting, it's often far more effective if you kind of perhaps a little bit over the top, without going way over the top, but get out of your comfort zone. And also, I said something about practical tips about being heard. That means communicating with and being seen, and the PowerPoints being seen. Don't leave your PowerPoints and the sound set up until 1 minute before the service. Send everything to whoever's responsible. Make sure that if anyone apart from the narrator is mic'd up, that they've got access to the sound equipment. Tell them which microphone you're going to use. Is it going to be a headset? Is it going to be one at the lectern? Is it going to be a handheld mic? So practical tips, be organised with all those things, because they can really, a great kids talk can be ruined because no one can hear it. Because some of these, or the PowerPoints didn't work because they got sent at the last minute and actually they went into the wrong file and they never got put on the screen. So things like that can be really kind of ruin a good kids talk just because of a little bit of lack of preparation. So
that's really good and helpful, because some of those things only come up every now and then, but we do need to be aware of them. We also like to ask, what are some mistakes that you've often seen in kids' talks that are best to avoid? Like we've already talked about some of them.
Yeah.
Any ideas, going too long, or just making it more realistic.
Yeah.
Are there any other mistakes that you find of common?
Yeah. This is speaking from personal experience, not from others who do kids' talks in our congregation. Too long, just written out, and they're too long. The intros are too long. The kids, when they come to, usually with the kids' talk, kids will come to the front of the building, up the front to get a bird's eye view. The intros can be too long, and you can see the kids just losing interest after a very short period of time, because we want to do some big contextual thing about, yes, last week we talked about this and it was all about, this and this. And so intros, too long. Yeah, moralistic. They can be too moralistic. The emphasis is too much on the morals of the story. Too many big points. So that's the beauty of having one big idea and making usually one point in your kids' talk. Choosing the wrong people to be involved in the kids' talk is a common mistake. People who, it's just not their gift. We're all gifted in different ways, and getting the wrong people. And partly that is not having someone who is overseeing it and checking out carefully beforehand who the right people are to participate. Also, there's an element, so while I'm coordinating the kids' talks, I want there to be a bit of freedom. And so as a starting minister, there can be a temptation to micromanage the people that you've entrusted to this ministry. If you're not, overseeing it yourself, and you've kind of said to perhaps an elder or one of the kids' church leaders, I'd like you to coordinate this ministry, and there needs to be an element of trust. And so to micromanage, I think, is a mistake that I can look. I pretty much sort of see every kids' talk before it happens. Because the buck stops, with me at the church that I go to. And so sort of it's success or failure, if I can put it like that, kind of falls with me. And so I do want to make sure that it's done well, it's done in a way that honours God, that's engaging. But I do need to allow people to have a bit of freedom to be able to be themselves and put themselves into the kids' talk their way. So I think that can be a mistake to trust people. Yeah.
Excellent. They're a great list of things to be mindful of, mistakes to avoid.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Now, we're coming towards the end of our time together. It might be a tough task. How would you distill down all that you've said across the last, 40 minutes or so into a 30-second top tip for someone who's just started off, just landed in the church, just begun overseeing kids' talks?
Yeah.
What would be your 30-second takeaway top tip for them?
Decide whether you're going to have kids' talks. If you are going to have kids' talks in your services, make sure there is great oversight of the kids' talks. Entrust it to someone you trust and who can do it well, or have the supervision oversight yourself. So don't just leave it to anybody.
We're always interested in, with guests who come on the podcast, if you take yourself back a few decades, what would you say to your younger self? Just wisdom with ministry in this space and in life. What are some advice you'd give to your younger self?
Yeah, be humble. Be a lot more humble. When we're young, when I was young, I thought I could do everything. I thought I knew everything. I didn't really need to listen to anyone because I had it all together. I could present a kids' talk. I could do this, but actually, I'm getting in my late 50s now. I'm still learning, good things about kids ministry, about kids talks, from people who are really gifted and do it very well and have a lot more knowledge than me. So be humble. Even that's what I would have told myself, 40 years ago, which I should have known. Show some humility and grace. The people have really got lots of things to offer us as Christians, and so be a good listener. Don't think you've got it all together.
Excellent. I like it. But that does, though, bring us to the end of our time. That's a great note to end on. Thanks for coming on board. We've found it really useful and helpful and worthwhile. Good to have a familiar face here as well. And another shout out to Jenny. I'm sure she's enjoyed it. Thank you for coming on here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and thank you, listeners, as well, for tuning in. And if you would like to leave a comment of something that you found valuable in the space there, and that'd be great.
Excellent. Keep an eye out as well for our next episode, which will be coming out soon.
Yeah, and until then, keep preaching the word.
And keep starting strong.